They dragged him in like he was nothing. Shackled, dirt-streaked jacket hanging off his shoulders. No ID, no name, just another stray picked off the street. That's all he looked like, until the courtroom doors flew open and the Secretary of Defense marched in. No motorcade, no aids, no warning. Just 6 sharp words that cut through the room like a blade. Uncuff him. You have no idea who that is. Let's pause here because what happened next, you're not going to forget it. But first, drop your city in the comments, and if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe, because this one, it's going to stay with you. It started with a call, Tuesday afternoon. Dead slow kind of shift. The kind of day where beat cops are more bored than busy. A corner store manager had dialed and said there was a guy loitering outside near the propane tanks. Wasn't bothering anyone, wasn't panhandling, just sitting there, still as a statue, like he belonged to the concrete dot. When officers Martinez and Chen rolled up, they saw what they expected. Guy looked mid-50s, layered in clothing to worn for the season. Boots coated in the kind of desert dust that never really comes off. Hair going silver. Face unreadable, but his eyes, those told a different story. Eyes that looked like they'd seen more than they ever wanted to. Eyes that had watched men die. Martinez stepped out of the cruiser first, muttering under his breath, another washed-up vet. Loud enough for the man to hear. Chen just shrugged, or thinks he is. Half of them never served. They approached with that practiced, controlled stride of officers who've been around long enough to know they won't be challenged. The man didn't look up, didn't flinch, might as well have been miles away. Sir, I need you to stand up, Martinez said, firm, not rude, but not gentle either. Still, the man didn't move, not out of defiance. It was like his mind was somewhere else, like their voices were just distant echoes. When he finally did shift, his motions were slow and deliberate. He winced as he leaned forward. Old shrapnel buried in his spine made sure of that. Not that the officers knew. All they saw was someone not complying. I said stand up, Martinez repeated, this time with less patience. That's when the man raised his head. His eyes met their storm gray, calm, unreadable. There was no threat in them, just something older, something tired, like he'd danced this exact dance too many times to count. He began to rise, leaning left, trying, not resisting, but Martinez, to green and tense to read the moment right, saw attitude. He grabbed the man's arm and yanked. That was the trigger. The man's instincts kicked in before thought had a chance. No aggression, just a subtle, practiced redirection, a defensive shift. The kind you learn when your life has depended on it over and over again. Martinez recoiled, embarrassed, threatened. He slammed the man against the wall. Hard. Chen moved fast, pushing him down, knee to his back, cuffs locking in place. The man said nothing, didn't scream, didn't protest, just went still, his cheek scraping against the rough brick wall, like he'd been here before, like he knew fighting back wouldn't change the ending. But then he spoke just once, barely above a whisper. Tell Barrett I'm alive. Martinez blinked. Barrett, he scoffed. Who's that supposed to be? Some imaginary friend? Some old war buddy? Maybe a caseworker? Whatever. They didn't care. Back at the station, it was supposed to be a routine booking, but at WASN single quotes T. No ID, no wallet, no phone, just a duffel bag and silence. They ran his prints. The system paused, then froze. Screen went black. Then a line of red text they'd never seen before lit up. Identity classified. Federal hold pending. They stared at it. Tried again. Same result. Martinez shrugged. Whatever. Enter him as John Doe. The system didn't stop him. So that's what they did. Resisting arrest. Loitering. Disorderly conduct. Holding cell 3. The man sat on a steel bench, hands still cuffed. Eyes on the floor like he could see something the rest of them couldn't. He didn't ask for a lawyer, or a call, or food. He just waited. Someone spotted the tattoo on his arm during dinner rounds. Faded, military, meant something once. Hey, check it out, one rookie said, pointing. Looks like Rambo's uncle. Thinks he's special ops or something. They laughed. None of them recognized the insignia. None of them had served. None of them knew the same tattoo had once earned him a salute from the Joint Chiefs. None of them knew this was a man the Pentagon had buried under layers of black ink and sealed files. To the system, he'd been dead for over 10 years. Only a handful of people in Washington still remembered him, and they didn't sleep well. Next morning, He was loaded into a transport van with two drunks from a bar brawl. The air stank of old beer and stale sweat. John Doe said nothing, just watched the horizon roll past. When they arrived at the courthouse, nobody expected anything unusual. It was just another day in Judge Morrison's courtroom, until it wasn't. Asterisk, the charges were routine, the kind that cluttered court dockets every day. Public intoxication, petty theft, a domestic dispute or two. Cases that rarely made it past Monday morning gossip, let alone into memory. The public defender hadn't bothered to crack open the file. Yet, there wasn't any point. The man being escorted and looked exactly like the kind of lost soul the system forgets. Dirty jacket, worn out boots dragging with exhaustion, wrists bound and face blank, eyes staring at something far away that no one else could see. Judge Morrison didn't lift his head. Still thumbing through paperwork, he muttered, "Court recognizes the defendant as John Doe until proper ID is confirmed." How does he plead to? That's when someone rose from the back row. She was mid-40s, dressed in civilian clothes, but moved with unmistakable discipline, the kind only decades in uniform could instill. Sharp features, hair cropped short, eyes that missed nothing. She didn't wait to be called forward. She marched straight to the bench, produced a leather case, and handed the judge a single sealed file. He broke the seal, flipped it open, read the first page, then stopped. Slowly, he took off his glasses, stunned. His voice dropped to a whisper. This can't be right. But it was. The man in cuffs wasn't a vagrant. He was Colonel Thomas R. Keene, former Delta Force commander, officially declared dead in 2009 after a mission the government still refused to acknowledge. A mission that had stopped a catastrophe no one would ever hear about. Because success in Keene's world wasn't celebrated, it was buried in silence. The woman who brought the file spoke with calm authority. "Your Honor, Colonel Keene was never meant to stand in this courtroom. If these proceedings go forward, you're inviting a national security crisis that won't just end this hearing, it'll end careers." Before the judge could respond, the doors at the rear of the courtroom opened again. But this time, it was different. The air shifted, a hush fell across the room, the kind of silence that comes when power steps into the room, and everyone instinctively senses it. Black boots struck the tile floor in rhythm, precise and unflinching. The Secretary of Defense entered, flanked by aides and a federal marshal. No words, no introduction, just her presence, calm, focused, intimidating in the way only someone who's used to life and death decisions can be. Her uniform was flawless. Her gaze unyielding. She walked straight to the bench. "Uncuff him," she said. Judge Morrison froze. One of the officers who brought Keene in shifted nervously, about to speak, until her cold gray eyes landed on him. "Did you lay hands on this man?" she asked evenly. The officer hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "Then I suggest you step back," she said. "Unless you want your badge shredded at the Pentagon along with any future you imagined in federal service." The cuffs were removed. Keene stretched his hands, saying nothing. Years of operating in silence had trained him to let others do the talking. The secretary didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The gravity in her words filled the space. "This man," she began, "commanded Task Force Odin. The operations he led don't appear in any database, but their success kept this country safe. He was wounded in ways that are still classified. He buried men in unmarked graves on soil not found on maps. While some of you were in lecture halls debating tort law, he was making sure you lived long enough to pass the bar." She paused, let it settle, then turned to Keene. "You shouldn't be here." Keene finally spoke, low, rough, steady. "I shouldn't even be alive." She nodded once. "Then let's correct both mistakes." For 15 years, Colonel Thomas Keene had been erased, declared dead on a black op no one would ever officially confirm, buried not just in records, but in secrecy so thick that even high-ranking officials barely knew he still existed. The mission that killed him had been simple in concept: eliminate a growing nuclear threat, but disastrous in execution. A terrorist leader deep in Waziristan had somehow acquired enriched nuclear material. It was the kind of intelligence that triggers sleepless nights in war rooms, that forces impossible choices on no commanders. Keene's team was inserted covertly to eliminate the threat before it could spread, but plans, no matter how carefully drawn, rarely survive first contact. Weather turned, enemy movement intensified, comms failed. The evac never came, and the desert swallowed them. When the smoke cleared, Colonel Thomas R. Keene made the most difficult call of his life. He vanished. Not because he was afraid, not because he'd fallen apart, but because the operation had gone so catastrophically wrong that keeping him alive posed a threat to ongoing missions in over a dozen countries. His existence had become a liability, so he erased it. Keene died that day, at least on paper, buried in silence beside the team he couldn't save. In the years that followed, there were no medals, no parades, no honors. He drifted from place to place, working odd jobs under false identities, fixing old boats on the Virginia coast, mending fences in rural Montana, tinkering with busted air conditioners in Arizona. He kept to himself, never drawing attention, always carrying the crushing burden of choices that had reshaped history from the shadows. Eventually, he found himself in Washington again, not for vengeance, not to be recognized, just to settle something. Even ghosts need to put certain things to rest. That's when it all started to unravel. He had gone into AVA office to help a fellow veteran, a man blinded by an explosion, navigate the bureaucracy of a benefits claim. Just reading the damn forms for him, that was all. But the clerk behind the counter wasn't in the mood. She was overworked, frustrated, and hardened by too many fraud cases. She glanced at Keene, shaven in worn-out clothes with crumpled documents in hand, and jumped to a conclusion. She cut him off sharply, said she wasn't processing any fake claims today, pointed him toward a soup kitchen instead. Keene didn't argue. He never did, not with people who'd already decided who you were. He just turned and walked away. But there was a camera in the ceiling, and when he'd signed in using one of his aliases, the system had flagged it. Within hours, law enforcement had received notice to pick up a possible impersonator. No one took a second look at the report. No one questioned why the supposed fake had the posture and presence of a man who'd lived through 1,000 combat hours. They found him outside the local VFW hall, drinking coffee with the same blind friend he'd gone to help. He didn't resist. He didn't explain. There didn't seem to be a point. He'd been hiding in plain sight for 15 years. Another day in the shadows was nothing. But then the system, so good at ignoring nuance, ran into something it couldn't categorize. And that's when the cracks started to show, sometimes in rare moments. That's when the truth manages to surface. Once the secretary arrived, everything changed. Fast. Charges like trespassing and resisting arrest disappeared in under 60 seconds. The judge avoided eye contact. The prosecutor stayed silent. The officer who'd manhandled Keene during the arrest stood there, frozen, caught between shame and confusion, not knowing whether to say sorry or simply walk away. But the secretary wasn't finished. She turned to Keene, her tone heavy with a gravity that went beyond clearing his name. "Colonel," she said, "I know you didn't want to be found, but we need you." Keene studied her face for a long moment. "Why now?" Her answer came cold and direct. "Because the man who sold you out in 2009 is back, and this time, he's being nominated as the next director of national intelligence." The silence in the room thickened, not the shock of surprise, but the weight of old scars being pulled open again. "Garrett Humes," Keene said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. "He's been nominated, and if he's confirmed, he'll gain access to networks that could destroy everything we protected. For the last 2 decades, you're the only one who can tell the truth about what really happened." Keene said nothing for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm and sharp as a blade drawn in winter. Then he should be very afraid. For days later, a hearing was convened in a restricted room beneath the Capitol. No cameras, no media, no audience, just a classified setting, a few senators, and one man who wasn't supposed to exist. The senator leading the panel leaned forward. "State your name and rank for the record." "Colonel Thomas R. Keene, U.S. Army, retired, former commander, Task Force Odin, JSOC. You understand this proceeding is classified, and that lying under oath carries criminal penalties." "I do." "Are you ready to testify that Garrett Humes, current nominee for DNI, deliberately compromised top-secret operations for personal gain?" Keene looked them straight in the eye. These senators, who'd made careers talking about war from behind polished desks. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not ready to testify." And just like that, the air left the room. Asterisk. The committee chair narrowed his eyes. "Then why are you here, Colonel?" "I'm here to prove it," Keene replied calmly. He reached into his coat and pulled out a scorched data chip, its edges charred, like it had barely survived destruction, and in many ways, it had. This chip contains logs, communications, and financial data from 2009. He said, everything you need to understand how Garrett Hume betrayed my uni and compromised missions across the Middle East. The technician in the room took the chip and inserted it into a secure system. A few seconds later, grainy surveillance footage flickered onto the classified screen time stamped, blurred around the corners. But undeniably real, it showed a younger Garrett Hume seated in what looked like a generic, undecorated office discussing the sale of classified mission data in exchange for secret offshore deposits and future protection from powerful figures. The room went completely still. The chair leaned in. Why didn't you bring this forward before? Keen's reply was quiet, but it hit like a hammer. The first time I tried, the evidence vanished. The second time, my men started dying in accidents that didn't feel like accidents. I waited until I could ensure no one else could interfere. And why now? Because you were about to give him one of the highest intelligence positions in the country. By sunrise, the story had broken, or at least the parts of it the public was allowed to see. Headlines exploded. Intelligence appointee linked to major security breach whistleblower uncovers deep corruption. During closed-door inquiry, Afghan war scandal resurfaces in D.C. Not one story mentioned Colonel Keen's name. That was his only request. No cameras, no interviews, no fanfare. He wanted accountability, not applause. He never returned to the courthouse, the place where he once stood in chains. But those who worked there never forgot him. The judge, shaken by the truth, began scrutinizing every name and file more carefully. The prosecutor transferred to a less morally ambiguous division, preferring white-collar crime where the villains wore tailored suits and the stakes were clear-cut. The bailiff began training courthouse staff to pause before they jumped to conclusions. And somewhere far away, in a quiet corner of the desert, there's a small building where veterans go when they're struggling to find their footing in civilian life. There, a man with storm gray eyes and steady hands helps them rebuild machines, resumes confidence. He doesn't speak of the trial, or the betrayal, or the man whose career ended in that soundproof room. Instead, he listens to broken stories, told by young soldiers who have seen too much too soon. Sometimes, just by being there, he helps them begin to find their way back, because while some serve and step away, others never stop. They keep going, not with medals or speeches, but with small, steady acts of compassion. Every once in a while, the system that let them fall remembers what it almost lost. Colonel Thomas R. Keen never sought glory. He simply wanted to serve with honor and go home to the people who meant everything to him. But when his country needed him, whether in the unforgiving mountains of war or a quiet courthouse in a sleepy town, he showed up, not because it was required, but because that's just who he was. And maybe that's the deeper truth. Real heroes rarely fit the image we expect. Sometimes they're the man sitting silently on the bus, the one with the far-off eyes and the straight spine, the one you might pass by without thinking twice. But those are often the ones who gave everything and never asked for anything in return. The ones who carry their service like a sacred, private weight instead of a title. So if you ever encounter someone like that, someone who moves with discipline and kindness, but keeps their stories tucked away, take a moment. Look closer. You might be in the presence of someone who changed history and never felt the need to mention it. If you've ever known someone like Colonel Keen, someone who bore their burden quietly and served without needing recognition, share their name, not their secrets, just their name. Let them know we see them, we remember them, because here, we believe the most powerful stories aren't shouted, they wait patiently for someone who's finally ready to hear them. If this story meant something to you, please share it. Help us keep these voices alive. And next time you cross paths with quiet strength, don't just walk past. You might be closer than you think to someone who saved the world and never breathed a word.